Good morning, everyone. My name is Noime. I'm the director of POINT, Promotion of Indigenous and Nature Together. Our organization is based in Myanmar, and we are working on indigenous people rights as well as environment issue in the country. And I'm also one of the EC member of Asia Indigenous People Pact and representing Mekong region on environment issue. I am very glad to be part of this Climate Smart Women Connect program, which focuses on climate and gender justice for indigenous women in Asia, because I'm also indigenous woman from Asia. And this section is focused on global and regional framework on climate change. I have some experience engaging of climate change framework at the regional level as well as at the global level. So I'll try to explain of all that I know so far and of all the concern and of all the engagement process that I can share to you, everyone. Every country nowadays would like to achieve sustainable development of their country. However, we all know that climate change is the major threat to this sustainable development. And therefore, every country in the world, they would like to combat climate change with an urgent action, and they can reach to some extent of some global agreement to those response on climate change. And there are 3 post-2015 agenda for action. And among them, the first one is the important one, the Paris Agreement, which we get agreement on 2015 in Paris as part of UNFCCC discussion. The second one is the 2013 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which we need to achieve certain indicator and action done by 2013 for among all countries of the world. The third one is the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. In terms of disaster risk reduction, in Asia, especially in ASEAN and countries like us in Myanmar, we already face a lot of disaster now. In our country, almost every year, we now face with flood. In Philippines, we know that country faced with a lot of typhoon, and more earthquakes are happening. Like those natural disasters are more and more frequent in the region, that if we don't prepare and if we don't respond well, many lives will be threatened, many lives will be destroyed by disaster. Therefore, this one is also an important response of climate change at the global agenda. And these 3 are also the most important foundation for sustainable, low carbon and resilient development for every nation of the world. The main focus of my discussion for today will be as the following. How are indigenous women represented and engaged in decision and policy making on climate and disaster risk reduction? And what are the things that going well and what are still the barriers that we are facing now? And I also would like to share on the initiative and policy that empower indigenous women in those processes, and the perspective of different stakeholders on how can we use climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction as an entry point to strengthen indigenous women's voice. So for this, first, I would like to explain the background and the current status of indigenous people engagement at the global level, especially at the UNFCCC. What have we achieved so far? What have we done to get our role as indigenous people in those processes, and the main achievement from that. Now I would like to first share about our experience engagement of UNFCCC at the global level as part of indigenous people movement on climate change. For us indigenous people representative, we are observer level at the UNFCCC. We cannot discuss anything in the meeting officially. We just have to go there, be present and be visible that we are there, we're concerned about climate change. Our role for responding climate change is very important. We have to act like that. So along with us, there are also other thematic focus group that also have observer status. So among them are the researcher group, youth group, human rights group, business and industrial group, environmental non-government organization, trade union group. All of those who are non-government, who are not the state representative, attend those UNFCCC meetings as an observer status. But we have to use every effort to reach our voices in the official discussion. Therefore, most of the time, we prepare our main message as a kind of a policy brief or as a kind of pamphlet. Sometimes we can organize side events that to highlight our main messages, and then in those side events, we're trying to invite our government delegate, and also we have like IP caucus preparing of collective voice and trying to reach agreement on certain things to raise our voice to those country delegates who are in favor of indigenous people. By using those different channels, we have been engaging in climate change discussion. And finally, when there is a Paris Agreement done, there are certain measures that involve indigenous people in those agreements. The first important article in the Paris Agreement is Article 7. In that, it mentioned that parties acknowledge that adaptation action should follow a country-driven, gender-responsive, participatory, and fully transparent approach, taking into consideration vulnerable group, community, and ecosystem, and should be based on and guided by the best available science and, as appropriate, traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous people and local knowledge system with a view to integrating adaptation into relevant social, economic, and environmental policy and action where appropriate. So in this Article 7, the highlight is that the traditional knowledge of indigenous people should be incorporated into disaster and climate change adaptation, and also gender responsive, and therefore it's also mentioned about indigenous women and in relation to traditional knowledge. That's why for us it is very important that indigenous women participation in climate change response, especially in adaptation with our traditional knowledge, is already highlighted in the Paris Agreement. Another Paris Agreement is talking about, as in the preamble, is the rights of indigenous people and local community. We know that human rights is important, and even in the human rights, especially in climate change, if we look at to the vulnerable group, the rights of indigenous people is very important. So this also is part of the preamble in the Paris Agreement. In the decision number 1 of Conference of the Party and the Paris Agreement, it is also mentioned that agreeing to uphold and promote regional and international cooperation in order to mobilize stronger and more ambitious climate action by all parties and non-party stakeholders, including civil society, the private sector, financial institutions, cities, and other sub-national authorities, local community, and indigenous people. So from this decision, we see that indigenous people to be able to engage in climate change is one of the important things as well. So I will also will follow up with later on the what happened as a follow-up process. The last one I would like to mention from the COP decision is Decision 135 from Paris Agreement is recognize the need to strengthen knowledge, technologies, practices, and efforts of local communities and indigenous people related to addressing and responding to climate change, and establish a platform for the exchange of experiences and sharing of best practices on mitigation and adaptation in a holistic and integrated manner. This is like the most important decision we achieve as an indigenous people advocacy and movement. From that, since 2015 Paris Agreement, later on in the COP, we have continuously discussion about the platform to exchange experience and best practices. And finally, last year in 2018 at Katowice in Poland, we reached an agreement of the establishment of local community and indigenous people platform. So that means indigenous people got an official space in the UNFCCC discussion to share their experiences and best practices. So if we think about best practice, who know those best practice more at the local community level? I think they are the indigenous people and the indigenous women who are very close to nature, who are the one who hold the knowledge to and share the knowledge to future generation. Therefore, if we are going to expand more of the work of LCIP platform at COP and throughout the climate change response, indigenous women role become very important then. So in the platform, so far, according to the discussion, there are three main functions. The first function is talking about knowledge, which is about us. The knowledge we have, we need to share in a way to benefit for combating climate change, in a way to promote the role of indigenous people, especially indigenous women, the knowledge we have. So for that, we need to come up with more of our documentation of our knowledge and things like that. These are the things we need to prepare, but this is one of the main functions. The second thing is the capacity of engagement. For this, I will also discuss more later. We want to engage in those processes, especially as an indigenous woman. Then if we have no experience before, if we are not given role in the past that much, if we are not ready with the capacity, we need to build up our capacity to engage there as well. So this is the second thing we discuss as an indigenous people as a whole. However, I think is like for indigenous women, this is also the key thing that is important for us. The third one is the platform function on climate change policy and action. Any policy, any action changes from the global level to national level, reach to local authority level, anything that is changes and responding to climate change will have impact on us who are living at the ground, who are facing those climate change situation on the ground. Therefore, it's also important that we are keep engaging on those changes in policy and action. This is the third function of the platform. Looking at this achievement at the global level, and we need to look at again what is happening at the local and national level. If we have to say about climate change and any response to that, indigenous women, we are already at the forefront because we are the one who deal with this in reality, in practical, and we are already active because we are the one who suffer from this, so we have to respond to this anyway. And and in addition to this, we indigenous women also face the double barrier from our social and culture structure, that our voices, our decision making are not reflected in the policy making and in the decision making processes. So however, we are proactive in those situations that maybe if we talk about politics or other things, oh, women, why you are in this? Peace, why you are in this engagement? But then if we have to say climate change, this is very natural for a woman to engage. And this also is like a good entry point for us to engage and build up our leadership in this. So for us, to give an example, at Point, every year we have conducted kind of assessment with the participation of indigenous women leader from the community. My colleague Noura, who is in this workshop together with you, she is the focal on that, so she knows a lot about that. So I'm just sharing about this, that she and our team has designed a kind of assessment process every year so that indigenous women conduct those assessments, and they got a finding, and we analyze and exchange among each other, and then from that finding we represent our finding at the national level, regional level, indigenous women activity, especially some activity organized by AIPP as well. So in this way, we try to initiate aware of indigenous women role to improve in those climate change responses. If we just say that we are at the community, our voice will be at the community alone, is not enough. Therefore, we have to find a kind of way to promote the role and the voices at all levels. And at the global level also, there are some indigenous women representatives very actively engaged there. But I think it's like only a few active participants is not that visible. So we need to build up more capacity building, which is also highlighted at the LCIP platform, that we need to promote more indigenous women participation in different levels. For that, I think the most important thing is for indigenous women to prepare more data related to our role. Data and documentation are important. We need to document what is our TK, why we need to engage, and by having more evidence-based advocacy and having more strong voices with our assessment done, I think we can promote more of indigenous women role in those different levels. AIPP is also playing a very important role in promoting indigenous women role at the regional and international level. Like this workshop is very much of an example that we will learn from each other, we will promote each other role, and our voices from this workshop will also reach at the global level, that all your discussion, we can link to what is discussed at the COP in Madrid as well. So every year now, we are starting to have like a side event with a highlight on IP women role, IP women situation, IP women related side event, so that when we talk about indigenous people and traditional knowledge in response to climate change, indigenous women got special attention in those side event programs. So I think these are very good initiatives happening at the different level. And one more thing I would like to highlight is in terms of regional level. In ASEAN, now people are asking for, apart to the 3 ASEAN pillars, people are asking for environment pillar as the 4th pillar because of the need of climate change response. So ASEAN leaders are thinking about this, and if this is really happening, this is very important for us as well, because for ASEAN country, very sure that we will be affected by the climate change. And Asia will be important in terms of land issue as well, because every country law and policy are not in favor of indigenous people land right. And in terms of climate change, if we want to take care of our environment and natural resources, without land security, how can we protect our environment and how can we protect ourselves? And for that as well, indigenous women land right is also very important, because according to culture, we women don't have land right as that recognized by some traditional practices as well. So this is also an issue important to highlight as part of climate change response as well. As an overall, I would like to say that at the global level, those responses are happening, and Sustainable Development Goal is led by one mechanism. Climate change is led by one mechanism. And there is, in terms of traditional knowledge related and biodiversity one, CBD also is led by one mechanism. However, on the ground, if we are looking at the community level, everything is related. We don't look at things separately from climate change to biodiversity to sustainable development. Therefore, our traditional knowledge nowadays is becoming very important to contribute to those initiatives and those mechanisms and to highlight indigenous people role. Whoever is doing on those actions, either government, at the international or ASEAN level, I think it is important to highlight that without the effective and meaningful participation of indigenous people, the motto of Sustainable Development Goals saying that leave no one behind will not be a true motto. So without indigenous people, this agenda of Sustainable Development Goal cannot be achieved, and this kind of climate change response will not be effective. Therefore, for indigenous women, I would like to encourage that this regional level workshop is very important, and not only from this regional level, we need to reach to global level, and not only at the regional and global level, all the things we have achieved so far and everything need to really reflect that on the ground at the national and community level. We need to make sure those linkages are really happening in reality. We should not be separate from this is just a global discussion. This is just what happened with us in the community. We need to link everything. We need to achieve in a sustainable way, and we need to achieve our rights in all those engagements. Thank you very much, and I hope that my sharing is something useful for you all, and I hope you all have a successful workshop from this. Thank you very much.